Yeah, you know what time it is. Hammer time. And today, we're going right back to the beginning. Sort of. The Curse of Frankenstein is a 1957 horror movie from Britain's Hammer Film Studios that's notable for several reasons. Not only was it Hammer's first horror film in color, but it was also the first on-screen pairing of cult movie legends Peter Cushing and Christopher Lee in a horror movie, a partnership that would last for several years after this. It was also directed by Terence Fisher and written by Jimmy Sangster, both of whom would also go on to be closely associated with Hammer. Most importantly though, this helped revive not only Frankenstein movies, but horror movies in general. You gotta remember, in the 50s there weren't a whole lot of pure horror movies. Oh sure, there were lots of sci-fi horror flicks, but gothic-style horror of the kind that Universal specialized in during the 30s and 40s had largely died out by then. That changed after Curse of Frankenstein, and afterwards Hammer would also revive classic monsters like Dracula and the Mummy too. Hammer had made movies before this, but this is where they truly became the Hammer that people know and love today. In other words, this might not be as important as the 1931 Boris Karloff Frankenstein, but it is a hell of a lot more important than, say, any Frankenstein movie made in the last 20 years. You can really tell this is going to be classy because it starts in ye old horror movie font. Actually, this opening text ends with "It is the legend of," leading you to think the movie is just going to be called Frankenstein, but the full title is The Curse of Frankenstein, so they're talking about the legend of the Curse of Frankenstein? Yeah, just pick legend or curse. Both of them is a little bit much. Hammer Films presents The Legend of the Curse of the Return of the Son of the Ghost of Frankenstein's Revenge. So we begin the way any good Frankenstein movie should, with a guy headed towards a creepy old castle. A castle with a surprisingly new-looking office. Bathrooms ain't great though, you gotta piss in one of those red buckets. Turns out this is actually a prison, and a priest is visiting Baron Victor Frankenstein, played by Peter Cushing, who's being held there.
Now you listen to me. When I've finished, you can pass it on to them. And then perhaps they'll believe me.
Jesus, is this because of his cameo in Mystery on Monster Island? That movie was bad, but it wasn't because of Peter Cushing.
Perhaps you had better start from the beginning.
I am starting from the beginning. There's 6 more movies after this one. Yep, this is one of those movies that's told in flashback, although this one goes back a little further than usual and starts when Frankenstein was just a young Michael Cera lookalike.
Now, what was it you wished to see me about, Aunt Sophie?
It is a matter of some delicacy, Victor.
Was it about the allowance my mother made you?
Wait, is this movie gonna be about Frankenstein learning the true meaning of Christmas or something? Cause if he ended up making that monster to fight the ghosts that visited him, that would actually be pretty cool. Oh, and there are some hints here that young Victor is gonna grow up to be a little morally questionable.
Well, will you tell your father that I'm here?
My father is dead.
Wow, I can tell you're really shook up about it. This is Paul Krempa, who's been hired by Victor to be his tutor. Now Victor can follow in his father's footsteps, starting by wearing his suit. Eventually, Victor grows up to be a great inventor. See, look, he made an 1800s version of Mousetrap. Alright, actually he's working on bringing dead things back to life. A lot of horror movies don't have the balls to kill a dog. This one starts with it already dead. The experiment seems to be a success, but the real question is, are we gonna get that famous Frankenstein line?
Paul, it's alive.
Okay, it's a lot more sedate and British here, but technically they said it. As amazing as this discovery is, what I really want to know is how Paul managed to not age in 30 years. Alright, they do add a beard and some gray touches in his hair to make actor Robert Urquhart seem a bit older, but he still looks younger than Peter Cushing, probably because he actually was. Well, Doc, you just ensured that a dog will never be sent to a farm upstate ever again. What are you gonna do now?
Forget the whole. Now we must take the part. Limbs, organs, and then we must build.
Okay, seems legit. Victor wants to create a superior being, and to get started they use the body of a recently hanged criminal. Oh, sounds like the perfect guy to bring back. For the brain you can use H.H. Holmes, I'm sure that'll go well. It may seem tame now, but things like actually showing a guy hanging from a noose, and implying Dr. Frankenstein cutting off his head and then dissolving it in acid were considered pretty shocking for 1957. Supposedly the movie caused such a scandal in Britain that the movie was given an X rating, although as I've said before, I think a Care Bear Bears movie probably would have gotten that back then. Before Victor and Paul are able to finish their experiment, they get an unexpected visitor.
I'm Elizabeth, Victor's cousin.
Wait a second. Old-timey setting? Rich cousins? She's gonna be Victor's love interest, isn't she?
Well, Elizabeth. Well, how are you, my dear?
Yep, I was right. No time for this Jane Austen crap now. Victor's got work to do involving more 50s gore.
Bardello's hands. The hands of the world's greatest sculptor.
Where did you get them?
I chopped him off after I murdered him. Paul's a little uneasy about continuing the experiment, not because of the whole playing God thing, but because Elizabeth might find out and get a terminal case of the vapors.
Elizabeth. She might find out. She is young, Victor. Her mind would be incapable of receiving such a shock.
Hey, come on, Paul. I know this movie's rated X, but she seems old enough to watch it. Paul tells Elizabeth to leave, but she can't since she's getting married to Victor, so I guess his real name is Jerry Lee Lewis-Stein.
Of course, we're engaged. Didn't he tell you?
How can you be engaged to someone you don't even know?
And also they're cousins. I don't know why Victor's bothering to create a monster. Just keep drinking that Victorian lead water and have some kids with your cousin. They'll probably turn out like this.
Really, Paul? Just because it was arranged years ago, that's no reason for my not marrying Victor.
Again, I can think of a couple other reasons why you shouldn't marry him. For starters, Victor's macking on the help.
When are you going to marry me?
What makes you so sure that I'll marry you?
Because you promised.
Yeah, he just said that so he could get into your giant frilly panties. You know, I can see why the ladies love Victor. He does have more Cushing for the pushing. Victor also continues his work by buying some eyeballs, which by the looks of it were real eyeballs from something. Excellent. Now as soon as Ron Jeremy dies in prison, I'll be able to give my creation a monster dick as well. Paul, however, is disgusted by how fugly the monster is turning out.
Look, I admit he isn't a particularly good-looking specimen at present, but don't forget, one's facial character is built up by what lies behind it, in the brain.
That's very true, Doctor. It's what's inside that really counts. To paraphrase the great Dr. Martin Luther King, let not a monster be judged by the color of his rotting flesh, but rather by the content of his Thing is, though, where's he gonna get his brain?
On the contrary, Professor Bernstein, it is we who are in your debt.
The trouble with us scientists is we quickly tire of our discoveries.
Okay, a professor with a questionable accent? I guess he'll do. There's just one little problem, though. The professor's brain is still inside his skull. But that's nothing a little murder won't solve.
If you step back a little, you'll see better. Look out, Professor, look out!
Damn, the professor was killed by shoddy craftsmanship. Now that Victor's got his brain, I have a question. People usually call the monster Frankenstein, even though that's actually the name of the doctor. But if Victor uses Professor Bernstein's brain, would that make the monster Bernstein?
Professor Bernstein.
Yeah, Steen, whatever. However, Paul thinks Victor's gone too far. You know, what with the murder and all. By the way, regarding Peter Cushing's performance here, this is a much less sympathetic and more sociopathic version of Dr. Frankenstein, and I love how dryly he delivers these evil lines.
You killed him and now you're mutilating his body.
Mutilating? I've removed his brain. Mutilating has nothing to do with it.
But I can stop you using his brain.
Why? He has no further use for it?
Cushing's version of Dr. Frankenstein might not be the one most people think of, but he really nails the role here. Paul ends up damaging the brain trying to wrestle it away from Victor, but I'm sure it'll be fine. Paul also tells Elizabeth to leave, and judging by the size of that bed, it looks like she sleeps in separate rooms from her cousin fiancé.
Elizabeth, I can't bear the thought of any harm to you.
Say, I think Paul might be starting to fall for Elizabeth. But Paul can't be with her. They have nothing in common. They don't even share a grandmother. Crap. Looks like Victor ended up making a mummy by mistake. Oh well, Hammer can still end up using that anyway. As far as the lab goes here, don't expect any sparking Tesla coils like in the Universal Frankenstein movies, but I kinda like the more stripped down look here. It gives it more of a period, almost steampunky style. However, Victor still needs Paul's help. What was Paul doing before he opened the door? At first, Victor's experiment doesn't seem to work, but that's just because he forgot the magic ingredient, lightning. Okay, now that we're more than halfway through, time for the big reveal of the monster.
Wait, sorry, just give me a second here. Let me get these things off.
Yep, that's Christopher Lee playing the monster. Oh, I'm sorry, I mean the creature. And while the makeup job here isn't as memorable or iconic as the classic Boris Karloff Frankenstein, he does look like a stitched-together dead guy. How the hell are they gonna stop this thing? Oh. Okay, never mind, that was pretty easy.
You must destroy this thing now.
No, that's not gonna happen for another 4 movies, and even then they'll still keep making sequels. Despite nearly getting killed, Victor just wants to keep working on the monster.
But I can repair the brain. It's what I've done that counts.
Think of it, Paul. He may be a monster now, but just imagine if we gave him a voice.
In borderland raids, they came in their hordes, ransacking villages, taking the spoils.
Unfortunately, before he's able to do that, the monster escapes, but at least he was able to find himself a nice coat that fits. Now, the 1931 Frankenstein had the famous scene where he drowns a little girl in a pond, but because Universal reportedly threatened to sue if there were any similarities to their version of Frankenstein, we instead get the scene where he kills an old blind man. Yeah, right, Universal threatening to sue. What the hell were they gonna do? Yeah, you may be blind, but I'll still see you in hell, old man. And see if you can guess what this leads to. That's right, more 50s gore.
We'll bury him before the villagers arrive.
They won't arrive. I didn't send the message.
You risk just 2 of us against that?
I mean, at this point, it's kinda your fault for still trusting him, Paul. And so, with the monster dead, Victor and Paul bury its body and never speak of it again. Okay, that's not the end. Victor digs the monster back up and keeps working on it. All he really needs to do is invent plastic surgery and it should look okay. And oh yeah, right, I forgot he was having an affair with the maid.
How about you marrying that woman?
Aren't you forgetting yourself?
You promised to marry me.
You knew what this was. She's got more news for Victor, though. Apparently she's pregnant with a Franken baby.
Why choose me as the father? Pick any man in the village. The chances are to be the right one.
Wow, that is one of the coldest and most brutal ways I've ever seen somebody called a whore in a movie. And they did it in a way that managed to get past 50 censors, so good job, fellas. Now get out of here, you little tramp. I got a cousin to marry. Later that night, the maid decides to go into Victor's laboratory to get some proof of his experiments, which I guess is all she can do. It's not like she can get Victor to go on Maury Povich or anything. However, she finds a little more proof than she bargained for. Frankenstein want bride! Well, Victor just murdered another person, and if you're wondering how they follow up a scene like this...
Pass the marmalade, will you?
That's right, with tea and crumpets.
How are the wedding invitations coming along? Had any replies yet?
Yes, quite a few.
Most of them said this was a bad idea and we shouldn't get married, but I just threw those away. Oh, this wedding looks pretty happening. Victor even made sure to include a brandy punch bowl. Maybe if he gets drunk enough, Peter Cushing will do the chicken dance. Looks like Elizabeth might have to wait to consummate their marriage, though.
I've work to do upstairs.
Victor, this is our wedding eve. I thought...
Oh, come, Elizabeth.
Yeah, that's what she wants to do, Victor. Paul drops by too so Victor can show him what he's done with the monster, although I'm not really sure what it is. He just seems to have given him a bad haircut.
Come here. Sit down.
Well, it's okay, but you got a lot more practicing to do if you want him to perform Puttin' on the Ritz. Paul, however, is still disgusted by Victor's experiments and vows to tell the authorities, which he does by sternly walking away at a pace where Victor could easily catch up with him. Meanwhile, Elizabeth decides to go into Victor's laboratory, and this proves why you should never go snooping around your husband's man cave. You might not like what you find, whether it's his secret stash of porn or an abomination against nature. Quick, Victor, save her! Nice shot, Doc.
Get back!
Okay, that didn't work. Let's try fire. That usually does the trick in a Frankenstein movie. Alright, and now we know that the monster has a surprisingly Homer Simpson-y scream. The creature gets dissolved in acid, destroying any proof, which brings us back to the beginning. And to be honest, I kinda forgot this was a flashback until now. Because the monster's gone, Victor's relying on Paul to corroborate his story, which I think would just result in Paul being thrown in prison.
Go on, Paul, tell them. You were the only person ever to see him apart from myself and Justine.
The girl you murdered.
Yeah, you know what? I don't think they're gonna believe you. Yeah, how do you like that, Victor? I'm leaving you in prison and stealing your cousin wife. You just got franken-cucked, asshole. The movie ends as Victor is being led away to be executed, but don't worry, Peter Cushing's still gonna be back for the sequels. Despite being predictably slammed by critics, Curse of Frankenstein was a huge hit for Hammer, making several times its budget back. Both Peter Cushing and Christopher Lee ended up becoming horror icons as a result, and the film's success led to Hammer not only making a series of Frankenstein sequels, but also reviving both Dracula and the Mummy soon afterwards. And the rest, as they say, is history. The thing that makes this movie work the most is Peter Cushing's performance as Dr. Frankenstein. He's coldly calculating and evil, but never once comes across as a caricature of an evil mad scientist. Christopher Lee doesn't have a whole lot to do as the monster, and the role isn't nearly as iconic as when he would play Dracula the following year. But hey, every horror legend has to start somewhere, right? If I have one complaint, is that the movie doesn't really have a whole lot of the monster, not even bringing him to life until well past the halfway point, but they were already pushing boundaries as it is, so I get why they couldn't show him too much. To modern horror fans, Curse of Frankenstein might still seem a little quaint and dated today, but for breathing new life not just into Frankenstein movies, but British horror in general, it deserves a place in history. Well, that's the last video I'm going to do before Halloween, but I'll be back next month with something that always turns out great, a movie based off a video game. Until next time...